right, doing a quick voiceover league of this league we ran last night. This was a Rakdos Shadow League that we just ended up throwing together. We got a donation to request to play Bomat Courier, so we threw some Bomats. Kind of played this like pre Luris band Shadow build, but obviously since Luris isn't involved anymore, we had to throw in some Street Wraiths, and we just decided to jam with this. So as far as decision making goes, with Bomat Courier, we're just trying to be like pretty aggressive on the cheap interaction, cheap threats. Bomat, Ragavan, Bolt, Push, our hand disruption. And since Bomat and Ragavan are getting in pretty quickly, Scourge is a naturally enabled threat that we can start running on turn 2. Croaksa, Terminate, a little more interaction, and then Teamer Battle Rage since we're running Street Wraith for our Shadow and Scourge, and just the ability to get down a pretty decent sized threat pretty quickly. And the sideboard decided to run the full 4 Dothy Voidwalker. It's been fantastic for me recently. Highly recommend the card. 2 Turok and a Liliana of the Veil for like the control matchups, 4 color stuff like that. Alpine Moon for Urza Saga, Tron, K Command, 2 Chalice of the Void, 2 EE, 2 Unlicensed Hearse. So let's go ahead and jump into these matches so you can see what was going on there. Let's move this over here. Alright, so this was the first one. Gonna be going through these like kind of quickly. So 5 lands, Bomat Courier, pretty much unkeepable. Like if you draw the 6th land, your hand is just completely dead. Nurturing Peatland's really slow redraw. We're on the draw. There's nothing really coming together with this hand. This one's a lot better. We've got Street Wraith, Thoughtseize, Shadow, Battle Rage. So like that's a really good core. This Lightning Bolt for interaction. Just throw back this basic swamp. We're on the draw. We've got a Street Wraith. We've got some stuff to do with 1 mana. If we do miss the 2nd land drop for a turn or 2. But if we hit like a fetch land off the top, and we get rid of that that swamp, then it means we can just like play down Shadow turn 2. The swamp's not really doing anything to advance our game plan, so hitting the Ragavan for the draw, the Scourge off the Street Wraith, means our goal now is just to like keep ourselves alive for a couple turns, because if we're able to get to like Shadow or Scourge with Battle Rage, that'll probably just win the game. Thoughtseize sees 2 Cyclers, so let's take the one that digs a little bit deeper. So we're up against Living End. Let's keep their known information popped out a little bit. So we do find the 2nd land. We're just going to go ahead and jam the Scourge down. We could play the Shadow, but right now the Shadow's a 3/3, where if I untap and bolt them, the Scourge is a 4/4, and it's just presenting a 2-turn clock, because I can bolt them, hit them for 4, so they go down to 16 off the bolt, 15 if they fetch, and down to 10 off the Scourge shot. So Battle Rage could end up just being lethal in 2 turns. But they top deck a Living End effect. So they do Architects of Will themselves. With this Shadow and just like the Monkey as chump blockers, we can potentially present lethal with the Battle Rage on our turn. We've got the ability to stand in front of some stuff. So they're just going to swing with the Wakers. So we're taking this all day, trying to just set up a lethal Shadow on the backswing. Wraith a dead draw. So we kind of tank on this attack for a bit. I decide just to attack with these 2. So if they do throw like everything in front of Shadow to not die to Battle Rage, then we've got a blocker for this Waker on the crackback. They decide not to block the shadow. So I'm just trying to like bait a force of negation here if they have one. And they do. So their top decks were just like Living End and Force of Negation off of that hand that started with just 2 single cyclers. Alright. So game 2, let's talk about a little bit of the sideboarding decisions for Living End. End up boarding out all the lightning bolts, one of the 2 terminates, and the 2 fatal pushes. I like to keep in some amount of hard removal because you don't want them just going like turn 3 endurance, turn 4 subtlety, turn 5 brazen borrower, like petty theft brazen borrower or something like that. Just lose to the fair game plan. So I try to keep in some amount of interaction. We boarded in the 4 Dolthies. We boarded in the 2 unlicensed hearse over the 2 Croxas, and the 2 chalices over the 2 fatal push. And then the last board in was one of the terminates became a Turok. Turok on the play, just like a 2/1 that grows whenever they cycle something, is not the worst. Not really much disparity between play and draw sideboarding against Living End. So this hand has Chalice as like our interaction. I've got a few lands. We got Bobble to cycle or to manipulate the top of our deck. If we see something like we can play Nurturing Peatland Inquisition. If we don't, we can Polluted Delta and fetch. So all we're really looking for here is a threat. Like a Dolthy would be great. Any of our 1-drops would be reasonable. So, Bobble. I don't really want another Bobble. A lot of times people keep Bobble that they see off of Bobble. But honestly, I don't think it's the most exciting play because we'd be drawing the Bobble on their turn and then go to our turn, play the Bobble, draw a new card on their next turn. And that's just too slow. I'd rather give myself the chance of drawing something live now. So we could have fired off this other Bobble on them, but I wanted to protect this second card from grief. So I decided just to wait on that. We see the endurance. We see the grief with the Living End, so they can grief on their turn. Foundation Breaker. So right now the goal is to like find an answer to this Foundation Breaker so they can't answer our Chalice. We hope that they don't cast the grief here, but they decide to, so they do get to hit our hearse. See, second copy of Foundation Breaker. So they've gone you, and you. So the second Inquisition, not the most thrilling thing in the world. We're just going to hold on to it, wait until next turn. Give them an extra draw step to try to find a Cascade spell. Because if they Foundation Breaker this turn, then we'd want to be able to Inquisition the Living End or the Cascade spell. But they end up missing their second land drop, which is great for us. Just means like we need to find a threat. Preferably not a Scourge of the Skyclaves. Thoughtseize is good because we can start working through Foundation Breakers. Like if we happen to find another Thoughtseize and can take the second breaker, then we know that this Chalice is going to be safe. We do see a Shardless Agent and a Force of Negation. So at the very least, we can take the Shardless Agent so we know this Foundation Breaker hitting the Chalice doesn't mean that we're just like stone cold. But Dolthy off the top's a really good one. And they Force of Negation, ditching the Shardless Agent on that Inquisition there, which I thought was really surprising. It was like, not only do they get rid of the Cascade spell that I was going to take, they also get rid of the Force Negation with a Void counter. So now if a I get to untap with Dolthy. I give myself the chance of being able to sack Dolthy into force negation for a living end. They decide to take out the chalice there, which is okay. I've got the Dolphy on the board. And second Dolphy is phenomenal. So I don't want to attack with this Dolphy. I want to save this one for sacking in case they find a living end off the top. So if you're unfamiliar with this interaction, it took me a while to wrap my head around it. I had people explain it to me and I just could not seem to get it. So Dolphy, if your opponent casts a cascade spell and you let Dolphy sit there, then Dolphy gets sacked to the cascade spell, goes to your graveyard, living end goes to their graveyard, everything comes back, nothing happens. But if in response to the living end, you sack the Dolphy, not the cascade spell, the living end itself. Make sure they put the living end on the stack before you sack anything. You sack the Dolphy. Your opponent resolves their living end. Everything from the graveyard gets exiled. Everything from the board gets sacked. Everything from the graveyard or from exile comes to play. Then the living end finishes resolving. So Dolphy exiles the living end with a void counter on it. So as soon as your Dolphy loses summoning sickness, you can sack it, recast the living end, get all your stuff back from the graveyard, sack their stuff. So having Dolphy in your grave against living end is great. Having two of them here to sit here and loop back and forth is even better. So that's kind of what I'm going for here. But if I attack with this Dolphy or something like that, then I run the risk of not being able to sack it or get one in the graveyard in response to a living end. But now that I have two of them, I can at least attack with one. That lets me keep the second one up to be able to sack. I also have the ability to like sack one of these Dolphys for that force negation that they exiled. So I've got an answer to a living end as well as an answer to their graveyard right now. And I've got like 9 damage rolled up in my back pocket with the 2 Dolphys and the Battle Rage. So if I have the chance to be a little conservative, I want to. So here end up deciding to force negation this living end, which is good for 2 reasons. One, I get a living end out and they can't like get it back in any way with an endurance. 2, this force negation that I'm casting off Dolphy, when it resolves, it goes right back into exile with another void counter thanks to my other Dolphy. So that's gone. And now we've got ourselves a good old-fashioned race. And I don't have to worry about leaving this Dolphy untapped since I have a Dolphy in my graveyard that's going to come back with a living end. So let's just crack in. They decide to block, but I'm going to keep my Ragavan around. This Battle Rage like isn't too important since I kind of have the graveyard and the actual living ends locked up now. Then Hearse is just like a good close out the game draw. Like now I get to knock the stuff that's already in their graveyard. I decided not to attack there. I'm trying to think of why. I had a reason. And I think it was I didn't want my opponent to have like... what did I not want them to have? A cascade spell right here. No. Can't really think of why I wanted them or didn't want to attack with the Dolphy. I think I just wanted to force a negation, a violent outburst right there. But we see that they don't have one. Their hand's a little bad. Just this Sky Turtle and another Force of Vigor. And then once we exile that third living in, it's going to be like all hands on deck. But I think I ended up just like keeping this Dolphy up so I could hit like this subtlety. So if they did find something like an endurance to block the Ragavan, I could just get subtlety. But now that we know they're pretty much like dead. Yep, you can see we have absolutely nothing. You know their last card is Force Negation. They should theoretically not have any living ends left. Use our treasure tokens to cast the Grief so they can't Force of Vigor them. That's it for game 2. So let's go to game 3. Don't believe there's any major differences. Brought back in the second copy of Terminate for the second Turok on the draw. Again, just kind of like a little nod of respect to just them having endurance and subtlety, brazen borrower, all that kind of stuff. This hand's weird. Like, I've got my best hate pieces with Dolphy, Chalice, and Unlicensed Hearse. Obviously, can't cast Dolphy off Sunbaked Canyon, but I've got a redraw of Bauble. I'm on the draw, and I've got 2 colorless hate pieces, so it's not the worst thing in the world. Decide to keep it off the chance that, like, I top deck a black source. Easy as that. So let's see what we got. I decide to fetch on my turn. I don't, or bobble myself and fetch. I don't have to. It was kind of like if I see exactly another hate piece or a black source, I'll probably just pass the turn. But since I saw, I think, a basic swamp there, or no, I saw a Battle Rage, I don't really need that, so I'm just shuffling it away. So it's kind of like if I see exactly what I need, I'll skip on this Thoughtseize and wait till next turn. But if I don't, then who cares? Alright. So we see the Endurance and a Violent Outburst. I've got the Chalice, so I'm not scared about the Outburst. I decided to take the Riverwinder to cut them off another draw for an answer to Chalice. So now all I've got to think about is this Endurance. And I feel like if they have to fetch or they shock in, have to go to combat or something with Endurance, that I can race it with Scourge. So that's kind of what I'm banking on here. Like, I know at least now I can play out the Scourge. I decided to just shuffle those 2 back in, just fine. So there's Scourge. Can't play out Mishra, or could play out Mishra's Bauble with this Chalice, but I'd rather just, like, wait. So if they find an answer to Chalice, then I can play out the Bauble. So we'll go ahead and keep their graveyard up. And then I decide to eat some stuff out of my yard with hers. Mainly because if I decide to crew it, then I can attack through this Endurance and grow my Scourge. Or if they attack with endurance, I can crew the hearse and block. So we got Force of Vigor for those two hate pieces. Pretty good. We still have Dolthy, though. We have Dolthy and they have no graveyard, so if they decide to fire off a living in effect right here, it's not the worst thing in the world for us. And they do. Why they did it on their own instep, I'm not really sure. Alright, so they've got a Force of Vigor coming off the top, which I don't really care about. There's nothing exiled with, or there's an endurance exiled with the void counter, which is important because, hey, endurance is going to shuffle somebody's graveyard back in, namely theirs. So there's another little bauble scry. We see the Bomat Courier on top. We've got the Sunbaked Canyon to go ahead and draw into it. And they have another copy of Violent Outburst, which means we are going to endurance them. Get rid of that Architects of Will. Now we just get back all of our stuff. We could have cycled Street Wraith and gotten that back too. But between the double Dolthy and the Scourge, I don't really feel like I need to lower my life total much more. Like, my concern right now is my opponent's just going to have, like, a flash in endurance and be able to block. Like, if I attack with everything but a Dolthy and they flash in an endurance and, like, block Bomat Courier, then I could run into an issue where they can hit me aggressively back with that endurance. And so I really don't want to go down to 6 life. Like, between endurance and subtlety, I feel like there's enough stuff I want to dodge that just being at 6 life is like an unnecessary risk. Because right now, I just have them dead next turn with what's on board. And then, like, the Thoughtseize in hand to check out. I guess they're not dead this turn, but you get the idea. They're not coming back from double Dolthy Scourge. Alright, so that was match number 1. Match number 2. Alright, opening hand, no lands. Pretty easy shit back. 6 is reasonable. We've got a threat. We've got some interaction. We've got a bauble for a redraw. See what our opponent's on. Blackcleave Cliffs could either mean like traditional Jund. It could mean black-red mid-range. Could be one of the scam decks. And it is one of the scam decks. So we see Fable of the Mirror Breaker, Terminate, 2 Terminates, Dolthy, Feign Death, Swamp. I decided to take the Fable of the Mirror Breaker. I think it's like their best grindy card here. And what I'm hoping is that they just play out the Dolthy here. I get to terminate that, and then I can start working on like landing a threat, getting through some of this interaction. So they do find a Fury, and they're able to Feign Death it. But thankfully, with like Shadow, Fury is not the scariest rebuy threat in their deck. Get an attack with Bomat Courier so we can get Scourge live. And then So my thought here is I get down the shadow instead of the scourge, because to get the shadow live, I've got to take, or big enough to tussle with fury, I have to take another big hit off this, which I really don't want to do. And then shadow's like still susceptible to terminate. What I would rather do is get down this shadow, get another hit in with Bomat, maybe find like a lightning bolt so that I can bolt them and Scourge can just outgrow Fury. Or like a Terminate will as well. I just feel like this is going to be a much more difficult threat for them to deal with if I can find the right interaction. So I do find the Lightning Bolt there. And just about punt this one away here. So, the Lightning Bolt is under Bomat Courier. I know that. I'm cognizant of that. We're good. What I mess up on is I should have fetched a basic swamp and played the Scourge. But instead, I cast the Scourge off of these 2 blood crypts to not go down to 2. And now if I want to get the Lightning Bolt, I have to fetch and shock, which I can't do at 3 life. I can't get my basic mountain off Polluted Delta. So now I'm forced into chump, like a chump that I don't want to make there. So best draw would be like Shadow. Go figure. So let's get these Bomats running in. And I'm not really worried about them having a second copy of Terminate. Most of these lists only play like 1 in the main, maybe 2, but the likelihood of them having the second, if they are running, it's fairly low. Another Dolthy is fine. I know I've got a Lightning Bolt under one of these Bomats, so like I have the answer to Dolthy. I already know that I have the answer to Dolthy. So there's a fun little trick with Bomat Courier here if you haven't played with the card before. So Bomat's ability reads, pay a red, discard your hand, sacrifice it. It's all part of the cost, which is important. Put all cards exiled with Bomat Courier into their owner's hand. So what you can do here is if you hold priority and sack 1 Bomat Courier, since sacking and discarding your hand is part of the cost, you put his ability to put all those cards into your hand. You can hold priority and sack your second Bomat Courier. You've already discarded your hand as part of the cost, so now you just get to resolve both Bomat Courier abilities, put all those cards back into your hand. So now we get to bolt this Dolthy, which we have to do in order to stay alive. Play out our second Shadow. So they're going to Thoughtseize our Scourge. And no attack. Alright. So they've got a Rebirth effect. Or at least a Rebirth effect off the top. Another Scourge is good for us. I could have played out the fetch land that they knew about, but that 1 point of damage doesn't really matter here. But this is what I was not playing around, was another Undying effect in hand. Which I probably should have in hindsight. Like, there's not a lot of things they could have there, but an Undying effect makes sense. Then I decided to play out this Street Wraith so that I can just have a chump blocker on this Fury that means the Undying effect doesn't matter. Now I get to crack in for lethal because I have Ragavan plus my fetch land for 14 exactly. So if I'd blocked with the Shadow there or like played the Scourge, they would have either gotten to kill my Scourge, kill my Shadow with their Undying effect, and not really where I want to be. But since I get to block with the Street Wraith, they don't get to Undying this Fury. So I'd be able to hit them with the Shadow, play my Scourge, go from there. Good game one. Game two on the draw. Let's talk about sideboarding. So I boarded out on the draw a couple of copies of Inquisition. It's decent on the play to take Undying effects, but on the draw, there's a pretty good likelihood that your opponent's going to like have their scam on turn one. And I don't want them to have like Scam a Grief, take my interaction, and I'm sitting here with like dead hand disruption in hand. So I'm going to trim a little bit of that. Trim some Street Wraiths because my life total is going to be in jeopardy if they like Scam a Fury on turn one and I don't have an immediate answer. Trim a Battle Rage because they have Terminates and stuff like that, more of them post board. And then I trim a single copy of Bomat Courier. I think that was more because of what I wanted to bring in. Like, I knew I was bringing in the 2 copies of Terminate in the sideboard, the 2 unlicensed hearses, and the 4 Dothies. So, Dothy, hearse, Terminate. Yeah. There's just 1 Terminate out of the board. But, like, Dothy stops the Undying Evil effects and stuff like that. Unlicensed Hearse stops the Undying Evil effects. This is, like, a really good fair hand. I've got interaction. I've got threats in case I do find a scam. Yeah, dying over here. And then as soon as they don't have a turn 1 scam, then, like, coast is kind of clear for me. So you've got Dreadbore, Hidetsugu, Terminate, Spyro. Pretty annoyingly resilient hand. Spyro, I think, is like best card against me. Obviously, the removal's good, having the 1-for-1 interaction. But what I'm kind of hoping here is if I can, say, take the Spyro, take their ability to go long here, and maybe find like another piece of hand disruption, or maybe they have to discard a removal spell off Kroxa. I might be able to force this Hidetsugu down to deal with Kroxa. That gets Shadow under Hidetsugu. Now I just have to worry about Dreadbore or Terminate if they keep 1, in which case maybe my second threat survives. Just trying to make this removal as awkward as possible. You could leave the Spyro and hope that they like discard some amount of spot removal to the Spyro. But this ends up working pretty well. Like I said, the hope was that they would discard a removal spell to Kroxa, which they do, because they're more likely than wanting to keep like a 3rd land to get down Hidetsugu. And there, that comes out. So now Shadow is dodged, Hidetsugu. Kroxa gets dealt with, but it got Dreadbore out of hand. I top deck this second Thoughtseize, which means I have a clean answer to the Terminate. And now we just get to, like, get threats down. Could have played the Scourge last turn instead of the Shadow, but I wanted to get the Shadow down to get this guaranteed attack in. Grow the Scourge outside of, like, bolt range or something. So let's play Scourge. Play Shadow. And now I don't care about this Dothy. They don't have anything in exile. If they do end up, like, pointing a removal spell at one of my guys, I can respond with bolting the Dothy. One thing I do want to keep an eye out for is them, like, Undying Eviling this Vessel, because it comes back as the enchantment side of Hidetsugu and would exile my 2 Shadows. Or destroy them. Is it destroy or exile? Destroy. So yeah. We destroy my Shadows. I don't want that. I don't care about this point of damage. Like, they're currently dead on the crackback, so they have to have something. So, if I put the onus on them here, then they've got to have a removal spell for one of my guys. If they have a removal spell, I can just, like, kill the Dolphy or kill the Vessel. But I just don't want to make the first move. So if they have an Undying Evil effect on this Vessel and I bolt it, like I said, they get to kill my 2 shadows. They're not dead to the Scourge. No point in doing that. But it looks like they didn't have anything. And we get to get away with our second win there. Match number 3. Alright. First hand, I think it was just like no lands. Too many lands. One of the two. Either way. 6 is good. We've got threats. We've got interaction. I think we're going to throw back this Blood Crypt. Because I can use the Peat Land to like ping myself every turn. So after like turn 3, the Nurturing Peat Land has done more to me than the Blood Crypt would have. So it's better for Shadow. Let's go ahead and get Bomat swinging. So second Living End opponent. Grief takes my Inquisition, and as every good Thoughtseize player knows, as soon as you hand Disruption something, there's gonna be a repetitive copy on top of the deck. Like, why people even bother, I have no idea. So we're just straight up in race mode now. Like, we've got to get them dead sooner rather than later. So we know that they've got Waker, Waves, and Striped Riverwinder. So what we're really hoping for is just to get like one turn off. Like them not have the Living End on turn 3. And we can get in a really good chunk of damage here. And we might be able to find like some extra bolts or something to finish them off. But it all comes down to them not having Living End on turn 3. So as soon as we see that cycled striped river, cycled striped Riverwinder, striped Riverwinder there, then we know coast is kind of clear to get in a big chunk. So we're just gonna bolt ourselves, grow this Shadow. I'm not really worried about my life total because if they're Living In, we're dead anyway. So, okay, so important note there that I messed up on. This is good learning experience. I fetched to see if Bomat Courier had exiled a Teamer Battle Rage. Because if I can just find one of those and present lethal, that's pretty good for me. And so I fetched and saw that there were 2 Teamer Battle Rages still in the deck. I should have gone to combat first and attacked and exiled this card and then fetched. Because now the top card of my library could be Teamer Battle Rage and I wouldn't know. So we decided to draw, see if we hit the Battle Rage, which we do not. But Bolt is good. That means that I've got Bolt on them plus Crack Bomat Courier, which gives me 4 looks and a draw for turn for like another Bolt. And I've got Street Wraiths and Mishra's Baubles, stuff like that could potentially find me one. But then opponent decides to shock in and go for a Violent Outburst, in which case we just get to respond with Lightning Bolt you. So we don't know if we happen to hit the Teamer Battle Rage off of that Bomat Courier, but could have. Yeah, could have. Words are tough this morning. All right, again, sideboarding against Living End, boarding out bolts. Terminate's better on the draw. Turok's better on the play. I board in our full play set of Dolthies, our 2 unlicensed hearses, and our 2 chalices. Opening hand is kind of sketch if we decide to keep this. Like, we've got Ragavan on turn 1 on the play, which is great. And then we've got Scourge that can come down turn 2, plus a couple Bomat Couriers. We've got a Street Wraith. Like, we've got a lot of hate pieces we can draw into. But at the end of the day, this opening hand, like, doesn't have a hate piece. And we can kind of reliably find one if we go down. So we decide to ship. We get into a Thoughtseize Dolthy hand. That's like everything we can ask for. Get rid of the bauble so we can keep this Scourge as a secondary threat. We can keep the Terminate in case they have an Endurance opener. We draw Chalice, so we're pretty set. This Thoughtseize is now just trying to like protect our hate pieces, so I'd be looking for things like Brazen Borrower, Foundation Breaker, anything like that. We see Ingot Chewer, so we're just going to go ahead and nail that. Get down Chalice. That way they can't just like grief us on turn 2. Let's get down our Dolthy. I decide I don't really need to fetch and shock here. They've got a Subtlety. And if they just hit a couple more land drops, I don't really want to get into like a race with anything. So I just like don't need to be in a race right here. So Subtlety our Dolthy. So we're going to put that right back on top. With the exile. They exiled a Force Negation that they found. Grief for a Scourge. It's fine because we just have Dolthy again. Assuming they're looking for a second copy of Subtlety. I'm a little surprised that they bend the Odawara here. Since it is just like a clean answer to Dolthy or Chalice. But we're just going to keep finding Thoughtseizes. Take the Subtlety. And we'll start attacking. Because if they do cast a Living End here, we've got the Chalice. So we don't care about that. And they can't find a free way to deal with the Chalice and cast the Living End this turn. Like, now that they've got 4 mana, it gets a little dicier because they already showed us Ingot Chewer. Kind of forgot about my own Chalice there. That's fine. But I'm just kind of taking the approach of I want to try to get the game over with. Got a Violent Outburst and Misty Rainforest exiled with Dolthy. Second copy of Chalice of the Void. Not the most exciting thing in the world. So Subtlety. So we've got Terminate. We're going to go ahead and terminate it now so that they can't have like a Force Negation on their turn. And then Shadow should hopefully be enough to wrap things up. Evoke a Grief, sure. And that's ball game. 3-0, going to round 4. Against good old Dr. Cheese. So we're on the draw. Opening 7, we've got Kroxa, Wraith, Agadine, Fatal Push. It's a pretty bad hand. Like, we've got no fetches, so we're not really getting Kroxa back anytime soon. We're on the draw. I think we can do a lot better. That's a lot better. I think I end up just ditching either the Bauble or the Fatal Push here. So the thought is I've got Ragavan on one, or like Interaction if they have a Ragavan. Street Wraith gives me another draw and helps with Shadow. So Bauble and Fatal Push are like my two weaker ones. Since my opponent doesn't reveal a companion, one of my thoughts here is, okay, they might be on Murktide. If they're on Murktide, I'd rather keep Bolt and Fatal Push, so I have like an answer to Ragavan plus an answer to Ledger Shredder. So I kind of go back and forth a little bit. Ultimately, decide I've got enough interaction that I can just keep the Bauble. Turns out that might have been a mistake because it looks like they are, in fact, on Murktide. In which case, I would have liked to have had that Fatal Push for Ledger Shredder. And then here I'm going to decide to go with the Bomat Courier. I think they're likely to have a removal spell here. And I'd rather them use it on the Bomat Courier than the Ragavan. Alright. So we've gotten some good cards here. What we're really worried about is Counterspell. So I feel like the best way to play around Counterspell is just to play a couple diverse threats. See what happens. They do not have a removal spell for either of those, which is huge. Then Iteration finds Unholy Heats. They do get to deal with one of these. But I get to keep something alive, which is all that I can ask for. So now I can play down a pair of 4/4s and hold up Lightning Bolt. They've got a, I think, a 7/7 Murktide here. Yep. Alright, so we've got a choice we can make. I can, like, bolt them here and try to grow my Scourge. I can bolt myself and try to grow Shadow, but then I'm dead to Murktide. I can go to my turn, attack with everything, and hope that they block one of these two, and I get to trade it and bolt for the Murktide. Ultimately, I decide not to fire off anything into turn because I want to wait and see what I draw. Plus, they could have Spell Pierce here. And I just draw like best possible. Like Terminate there, play around Spell Pierce, get this the Murktide out of the way, get to attack through, still have Bolt. Like, we're kind of golden. So that's game number 1 against Murktide. Sideboarding. Alright, so I bring in 1 copy of Turok. I bring in the 2 unlicensed hearses, a Terminate. What else? 1 Dolphy. So I board out 4 Wraiths, 1 Croxa, 2 Bomats. Board in 2 unlicensed hearses, 1 Terminate, 1 Turok, 1 Dolphy, and 2 engineered explosives. Was I running a K command in this list? Yes. So I got the 2 Terminates in the main. So I brought in K command, not Terminate. So K command, Turok, Dolphy, 2 EE, 2 unlicensed hearses for 2 Bomat Courier, because being on the draw against like all their 1 mana interaction plus Ledger Shredder is really bad. 1 Teamer Battle Rage to play around bounce effects like Brazen Borrower and Otawara. A Croxa to play around Grave Hate. 4 Street Wraith to play around Burn plus just like big flying dudes. So yeah. Get out of here. Opening 7. technically a 2-lander, which is good. And then we've got Bomat Courier, Shadow, Bobble Bolt, Push. Pretty reasonable hand. Like, we're not graveyard reliant, so we're not worried about unlicensed hearse. But we've got interaction for the first couple creatures. We've got good threats of our own. No threat out of their side means we're pretty likely to just fire something off over here. Again, lead with Bomat Courier, because if they kill that, I'm not too upset. And if they don't, like in this case, I just get to untap and have Hand Disruption, Shadow, whatever. So, I'm pretty inclined to go for the double Hand Disruption here. Because if I go for Thoughtseize and they have Counterspell, that means they get to counter my Thoughtseize, and then I have to follow up with Inquisition, which can't take a Murktide. But if I start with Inquisition and they have Counterspell, I can follow up with Thoughtseize and take a Murktide. Or if they don't have Counterspell, like if they don't cast it, I can potentially take a Counterspell and follow up with Thoughtseize on Murktide. So I would rather have this Inquisition get countered than Thoughtseize. So they do end up having the Counterspell. So we're just going to take Iteration and Counterspell, leave them with an Unholy Heat, Otawara Subtlety. And we're just going to get down double Shadow. I know if they have the Unholy Heat and they can kill one of these, we're just kind of hoping they don't find a second removal spell, which they do. Unfortunate. If I had waited one more turn, we could have gotten the Shadow down, protected from Bolt. E on 1 is fine. So, like, I'm really hoping that I find a Scourge here. Because I can bolt them twice to grow the Scourge outside of Unholy Heat range. And then I don't care about the EE on 1 if I find one. Come on. Okay. Can we move on? Alright. So I do end up finding the Scourge, which is great. Oh yeah, they don't have the Unholy Heat. What am I doing? All they've got is the Subtlety and an Unknown. So we're going to put Scourge back on top. Go ahead and kill this. I probably shouldn't have killed that right there. Because now I play into, if they have a dashed Ragavan here and just hit me and take my Scourge, like, I'm in such terrible shape. I could have paid the 2 for Spell Pierce, but I decided I'd rather get down the Scourge, and since they connive, but they have to immediately discard whatever they draw, I'm not that concerned about it. All I want is to potentially get this Scourge out of range of any sort of removal spell. So we bolt that, and they just decide to scoop. There's a little bit of bad life total management there. Like, honestly, I should have just paid the 2 for the Spell Pierce to kill the Ledger Shredder. And then waited till next turn, played out the Scourge where I could hold up Lightning Bolt and maybe hit him. But, like, I gave my opponent a couple outs here of top decking an Unholy Heat and being able to just kill my Scourge outright. They only had one turn to do it, but still one turn is like more than no turns. So, something to keep in mind. Alright, so last match of the league against Squirtle 19. We did see in the chat log that opponent was double queuing in a new to modern, one of the Moto new to modern events. But they're also 3-1, so you can't really take the MTG bot thing with too much seriousness. Pretty good hand. We've got a Ragavan on one. We've got interaction. We've got a Battle Rage in case we find a Scourge or a Shadow. Opponent mulled to 6 in Colony Garden. So immediately off Colony Garden, you know this is a Glimpse of Tomorrow deck. So Scourge is good. I would like to draw into a Scourge. So the good thing about this being Glimpse is they want to keep up their permanence as much as possible. Means they're less likely to just chump block with this plant token here. Bad news is we see double threat or double cascade spell out of them with the Violent Outburst and the Shardless Agent. So I know I'm in a bit of trouble. All my hope is that they decide to go for the Risen Reef and not the Violent Outburst or the Shardless Agent. Like, maybe they just can't get enough value off of those. And they top deck a Fury. So, bad news, they get Fury triggers off the Risen Reef. Good news, they have to discard a Violent Outburst to cast the Fury. So now I know they're down to a Shardless Agent. And we top deck an Inquisition, so now we can Inquisition plus Shadow. And we're just really hoping that our opponent whiffs. Alright, so Shadow. And it looks like a whiff. Good start. So the Shadow plus the Battle Rage isn't lethal. So because of that, I'm just going to try to like work out cards in hand. Maybe if they find an Omnath, they won't be able to like play a land, gain life, get back out of Battle Rage territory. So all we're hoping for is one whiff here. If we get a whiff, I'm pretty sure we win. I don't think these lists play Solitude, but we end up top decking the Thoughtseize, which means we get to double check. Chancellor, great. And let me introduce my new to modern queue opponent to the card Teamer Battle Rage. So we end up sneaking out a little bit of a win there. Game 2, sideboarding. So, Dalthy's not great in this matchup. You can, like, maybe exile a Fury and recast it, and that's okay. But all in all, it's not as good here as it is against the other Cascade decks. Like, not even close. But, Chalice of the Void is still excellent. So, I end up boarding in the 2 Chalices. I take out an Inquisition, because a lot of their payoffs are like more than 3 mana with like Omnath, Fury, all that sort of stuff. I take out a Kroxa because of Endurance, 2 Bomat Couriers because if they just like Fury or if they put any sort of roadblock in the way, Bomat gets stonewalled pretty quickly. In addition, what did I board in? Boarded in the Chalices. Boarded in 2 Dalthy. So 2 Chalices, 2 Dalthy, and I thought about the Engineered Explosives, but ultimately, I kind of decided, like, with this elemental version, they're too likely to just go on the fair plan. And I don't want to spend a bunch of mana and interaction on the fair plan, or on the unfair plan, when I'm just dead to that anyway. Like, EE looks embarrassingly bad if my opponent just starts off with, like, Colony Garden into Evoke Elemental on my board into Risen Reef. So, look at this 7. I don't have any hand disruption. Scourge is pretty good, but I don't have, like, a Battle Rage. I've got Terminate and a Wraith, so a little bit of redraws, but decide to ship it. 6 is much better. I've got a turn 1 threat. I've got the double Thoughtseize in the shadow, so I think I just end up throwing back the Mishra's Bauble. Kind of keep all of my, like, known quantity cards here. So, I could have let on Ragavan, but I really want to stop, like, a pitch elemental. Like, I don't want to lead on Ragavan and then just have a Fury here and me get kind of, like, stuck. Alright, so now Endurance is gone. Let's just get down. Shadow is the biggest threat available. Next turn I can go like dash. Alright. Risen Reef hitting Cavern of Souls is good, because at least that means I know that I'm not, they didn't draw into like a good elemental there. And then the whole goal here is to, like, get some chip damage in so that I can potentially present a lethal Battle Rage next turn. Opponent decides to keep all of their chips on the table. And top deck an Omnath, which is scary. So, 2 concerns here. One, I know they have a fetch land. And this fetch land represents 7 life gained. They play it on their turn and then crack it again on my turn. But then when they go ahead and, like, main phase fetch and shock, my thought is if you just don't draw a cascade spell here, I have a reasonable chance. And they tap out for Fury, which is not a cascade spell. And I draw best possible draw, which is a fetch land there to grow Shadow. So for anybody doing the math at home, Shadow is currently presenting 20 trample damage. So they've got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 toughness. Shadow by itself is lethal. But we're going to get a little cheeky here. It's like, I'm a little bit concerned that they just have like a Solitude. And because I only have the basic Swamp left. But we can only go up to 8. Which is fine because we're going to do 7. Trample over for 1. Put them to 9. And then we've got 8, 9, 10. 4 lethal. And the trophy. Alright, so a couple notes about the list real quick for anybody who happens to still be watching this. Find room for the 4th Blood Crypt. I meant to put it in. I rented it before the league. I just did not add it to the deck. But you could easily swap out like Catacombs or the Sunbaked Canyon for the 4th Blood Crypt. Probably like the Sunbaked Canyon for another Nurturing Peatland, and swap out like one of the Verdant Catacombs or one of the other fetches for the 4th Blood Crypt. The Sunbaked Canyon was from before I added Dauthi to the sideboard, so I more just wanted like a canopy land that could tap for red. But once Dauthi gets added to the sideboard, I think having nothing but black sources is more important than having the canopy land that taps for red. So, swap Sunbaked Canyon for a peatland or any black canopy land. And then add the 4th Blood Crypt over like Verdant Catacombs or something. I think the double swamp is nice, so I'd recommend keeping that. But otherwise, sideboard performed reasonably well. Turok might be a little bit of a stretch. Like, getting to 4 mana isn't the most consistent thing. So if you have another card you want against 4-color blue-white control, you might consider that in that spot. Like more Liliana the Veil or something. But I think Turok for me generally has been an all-star, so I'm kind of hesitant to cut it. In the main deck, I don't think I was anywhere close to casting Aghanim ever, but it's pretty free as just like the 18th land. If you're on this train of current Grixis Shadow, like not running Inquisition, you could cut those and just throw in like a Dismember, or a Dismember and like another Fatal Push, Dismember Unholy Heat, something like that, and be fine. If you like Unholy Heat, you could find room for them, but I think the removal suite, as we got it, is pretty proactive, and I like that. You could find room for K-Command or something in the main. Bunch of flexible options to go with, but this is just a nice little voiceover of this league, so you can see some of the gameplay that this deck presents. Hopefully it inspires you to pick up this or something similar, try it out in the league, see how it goes. But as always, appreciate everybody checking out the video. Feel free to come check us out live at twitch.tv/the_control freak. Controls freak spelled just like in the YouTube heading. We've got a link to the Discord down below. So if you're wanting to come check out this list, other lists, talk about sideboarding, matchups, any sort of variation of Shadow, feel free to come hang out whenever you want. Otherwise, yeah, hope to catch everybody next time. Adios for now.